We're very pleased to welcome you this morning. We think you all deserve, gold stars for virtuous behavior, 8:30 in the morning. So thank you for being here. One of the great things about doing Past President Symposium, it doesn't always mean that past presidents are the ones who are presenting, but it just so happens this year that all of the presenters of the symposium are past presidents of the Association for Gerontology and Higher Education. And I guess since I'm the person who was the president the longest time ago, which is 1984, I guess I get the chance to welcome you this morning. Now, back in 1994, when I received the Tibbetts Award, I gave my Tibbetts address. It was called Work Till You Drop or Knowing When to Stop, which was about career development and at what point you should decide. Well, a lot of things have happened in our thinking since then, and today I'm going to try to spend a little time talking about employment and career development. Now, Ed, it's just about 26 of, so you're going to keep time? You're going to throw your body in front of the podium when it's time for me to stop? I don't think it's any accident. We all know that we are in a graying globe, and that the world is aging, and all of us in this room have probably been a part of our understanding of this process, and we're even participating in the aging phenomenon ourselves. And of course, this was something that comes out in the New York Times a number of years ago, looking ahead to 2020, but this is what the possibility may be. And unfortunately, I used to think this was funny, but now it may mean that our BMWs are up on blocks and that we're out camping out in our less than optimal situation. So one of the great challenges right now is where are we in terms of issues of work? How much longer will we work? What is happening in terms of making sense out of the issues that have emerged in terms of the current employment situation, people choosing to work longer, people having decreased pension wealth? How is that affecting our thinking about these issues? So what are the challenges today that face midlife and older workers? Job loss, all of us have been reading the paper daily. We see example after example of major companies downsizing and outplacing, and I've been someone who has been following this for many, many years, and this is the worst because I was not available in 1929 to see the crash, although I heard a lot of stories about it from my father who had graduated college that year. And so I think that we are seeing now, some people have said, well, it's not any worse than the early 80s. But quickly, things each week seem to be getting a little more problematic, and so we have to watch very carefully. The other thing is we certainly have plateauing, which means that in the hierarchy of advancement, people are not moving up. People are holding on to the same level positions that they've had, and in many respects are feeling lucky that they're still there. Obviously, a big issue for everyone is skill obsolescence. And of course, updating and maintaining professional competence is one of the great challenges of anyone if they're going to continue to work for as long as possible. And to those of you who are gerontologists here, I'm sure you'll be shocked by the notion of stereotypes. But one of the things you may not have thought about, which seems to be often in the literature, is decreased opportunities, in that when someone is reemployed, typically it may not be as demanding a position, and it may most often has less pay. And then this last phenomenon, I haven't changed this slide, but decreased wealth seems to be very salient. For those of us, the old, I think it's the Rick Moody joke, your 401k is now a 201.5k, So in the issue of continuous work, we really want to talk about career self-management. Now, for many years, we have been talking about career self-management. It comes to us from the work of Hall and Mervis and Hall going back to the late 70s, talking about the protean career. This is the idea that we are responsible for ourselves, that we are self-managers, that we have to look at our own careers and manage them, not depending on the paternalism or maternalism of the corporate entity which we work, that we have to really understand our own careers, take responsibility, take responsible for our personal behaviors, updating, and if we desire to work longer, making sure that we are competitive. My own personal philosophy is that if you want to work longer, then you better be darn sure that you have the skills and abilities that are necessary to work longer. And I have a phrase that I like to say, just because you're old doesn't mean you can screw up, and just because you're young doesn't mean you can do the job. So you have to be sure that you are in a competitive situation. And so what that means is that you take personal responsibility for training and development, including learning, skill mastery, updating. And we have to understand, going back into career theory, that careers are a combination and sequence of roles across a lifespan. And one of the most famous, of course, is super. And one of the most interesting things, if you don't have a chance to look at career theory, is that Super and Ginsburg and many others had to revise their theories so they were more in line with modern gerontological thinking. Now, I'm famous for this notion of crap tolerance. It's appeared in my local paper in a box. This comes out of one of the big hazards of midlife and later life work, that as you get older, your willingness to put up with crap goes down. And so one of the things you have to be really careful about if you're going to work with other people is that you recognize this as a potential challenge. So the origin of the crap tolerance factor came out of discussions of things that middle-aged and older workers had to be careful about on the job. And this includes a changing threshold of acceptance for certain tasks or situations. If individuals choose to work longer, then they may have to be careful in how they respond to certain situations, comments, and assignments. Ideas that have been presented before, approaches that have been problematic, for example, may need to be explored again. One has to be careful not to say that it was a bad idea 15 years ago and it's still a bad idea. Working with others requires patience and care. However, there is no doubt that some individuals are no longer willing to work in certain situations and will decide to change jobs and/or retire. I don't know how many of you have been around a long time where you work, but if knowing history can be helpful and not helpful, because sometimes people want to know the history, and other times they really don't want to know the history. And so you have to have some judgment about when you decide to disclose. And you have to pay real attention to the implications of what you say. We can look at the issue of crap tolerance in terms of hassles and coping. And this takes us back to the notions of Lazarus and Folkman in terms of primary appraisal of the situation, and then coping mechanisms that are emerging and what people are willing and able to put up with. So that what are the demands on the person, what are they willing to focus on? Obviously, jobs, personal life and families, caregiving demands, all of these things make a real difference and put additional pressure on the person. Workers' tolerance for negotiating the day-to-day environment of work affects how much satisfaction they gain and how much commitment they feel to continuing work. And so in many people's minds as they work through the day and depending on the demands, I myself think about retiring maybe once or twice a day, but I don't really do it. But I think about it as an option. Why? Because I don't like what's going on around me or the task I have to do. So that give me a way to approach it. I often say to friends, I can't retire because then I'll have to work for my wife, Ronnie, and she'll really make me work. Also, the fact that over time, people may have decreased expectations. We may have seen that hard work does not necessarily lead to rewards, that change initiatives may be fleeting, and I think even in academia we see this where there's a disconnect between involvements and ultimate rewards. It's certainly true. Lots of experienced workers in industry have the same thing because they are good workers, but they don't necessarily have the opportunity for increased reward, salary increase. And of course, in this time period, there may be no salary increases. So we've decided that the crap tolerance is amusing to hear a little bit about and think about, but that really isn't the answer. And I might point out to you that overall the picture of job attitudes and related outcomes as it concerns the older worker is quite positive for both employers and employees. Older employers are on the average more satisfied, show greater commitment and involvement with their jobs and the organization, and tend to stay with the organization longer than younger workers. From a management perspective, older employees are likely to be easier to manage. The stereotype of the cranky old person at work is not supported by the research. These results are also favorable for older workers themselves. There is some evidence that employees can look forward to relatively satisfying work experiences toward the end of their career. And it's very important that we emphasize wanting to be able to present a more positive approach to later life work. I and my colleagues have felt it would be much better to give a new interpretation to the crap tolerance factor by focusing on the following discussions. C stands for conscientiousness, and one of the best predictors of performance on the job is the personality factor of conscientiousness. R for rapport, working successfully with coworkers and having reliability. A for adaptability, and P for performance. I think that's a much more positive interpretation. If we look at the work of Robson, Hansen, Abels, and Booth, they found that successful aging in the workplace from the perspective of workers involves adaptability and health and selective optimization and compensation, the emphasis on positive relationships in the workplace, being in a situation that provides occupational growth, the opportunity for personal security, continued focus and achievement of personal goals, and those who see these as important are more likely to pursue them and facilitate them. Workers appear to focus on continuity, not change. And so we want to be sure that we understand work flexibility and adaptability in terms of technological change, interpersonal adaptability. It's not very convincing if you can't pronounce the word, including age differences. And of course, although we don't have the time this morning to talk about teamwork and age heterogeneity in teams, and also the issue of supervisor relationships. In my own research, I am very fond of the measure organizational-based self-esteem, which is how people define themselves in regard to their workplace, feeling that you're making a contribution, that your involvements are important, that you're valued by your workers and supervisor, and so forth. Erhard Ulbrich has talked extensively about coping in later life work. We all are familiar with the theories of Valiant, especially in Aging Well, the fact that people bring to the workplace lifelong coping mechanisms, which really are very predictive of later life success in the workplace as well as in retirement. In terms of the industrial psych literature, Lord and Camphor talk about emotional maturity. Emotional maturity and emotional IQ has become a major part of the workplace, and of course, middle-aged and older workers have the ability to be, the potential is there to be emotionally mature, and also to have adaptive skills. Okay. We also want to emphasize that for many people, continued work includes intrinsic rewards of work, and that may become even more important with age. For other people, they may have to work because they need the money. And for some people, it works out fine. They want to work longer, and they need the money. So that can work, too. Satisfaction with coworkers, relationships, sense of participating in meaningful work are very important, and the coworker relationship is even more important for women. Something to keep in mind, what are some of the special benefits of career self-management in midlife and older workers? Recognizing that there is increased value. Knowledgeable, adaptable, and continuous learning can be extremely important in a work organization. And many organizations, even in these tight times, are realizing that it's expensive to replace individuals and that it's worthwhile keeping them there on the job. The other thing is, of course, is to understand is increased opportunities may be present within and outside of current organization. But in the current climate of the last month or two, we have to be very concerned about that. What are some of the things that work against career self-management? difficulties of identity connection to organizational work roles. Sometimes people have a disconnect, and individuals' ability to self-manage may not be present, and the ability to self-appraise, as we heard in the opening lecture at this meeting, people may not be good at judging their own capability level. Just quickly, I want to just go back to a model that I developed a number of years ago, and this is really my major point today, is that there are many different vectors that people are weighing simultaneously as they are moving through their careers. One brings to the situation their past selves and past history, but also we have this notion of projecting ourselves into the future and our future career, what Levinson called the dream. We also have the issue of organizational-based self-esteem. We also are filtering perceived norms about what's happening in the workplace and what's happening in retirement. Coming around the other side, sense of self, sense of time and understanding. How do we understand our own career progression? How do we understand what is happening in our lives and our personal growth? Our perception of control in our work situation and in life in general. And going back to this issue of personal insight, how good are we at understanding ourselves, our motivations, our behavior, and working with them? And then in the workplace, what are our current obligations, our current appraisals of the situation, and what are our future obligations? Because we, in some situations, and this is especially true in academia, we do have choices of whether we take on certain assignments or whether we join certain committees or whether we take involvements in activities. And so, in that sense, we shape some of that. In terms of the work situation itself, continued work and employment hangs on the relationship with coworkers, work-family demands. I'm sure many of you in your discussions of child care and elder care are very aware of the fact that some people will leave the workforce at midlife or older adulthood because of family caregiving demands. And then the real question is, what are the work opportunities? And up until this year, I would talk about the fact that we had some control over shaping working full-time or part-time. Novelli's 50-plus book, Dykewald's The Power Years, and on many other volumes have written about a creative retirement and shaping it to fit our later life for personal satisfaction and creativity. Well, I would argue in the past 3 months, we've watched that personal creativity and personal shaping turn to, do I have a job and will I have enough money to keep going, and will I be able to rebuild my resources so that I can have the kind of retirement that I want? How can one emphasize more than anything else continuous learning and maintaining professional competence? That is the key to work today. Let's also understand some other things quickly. Perceived organizational culture. Is the culture friendly to middle-aged and older workers, and are managers sensitive to meeting their needs? And it's very important, although, again, self-evaluation is also intriguing to me, as our speaker at the opening session said, but many people are aware of self-evaluation for good or bad because it's counted with employment-based appraisal. So often in today's 360-degree performance measures, you get your own chance to assess yourself, and then all your coworkers assess you, so there may be a reality check that creeps in occasionally. And also the appraisal of your current situation. My feeling is that if you're not willing to put up with all this stuff, then you retire. If you don't want to work with other people, if you don't want to deal with families, if you don't, well, you can't get away from the families, but you can on some of the other things. Obviously, relationships with family and friends are important. That's not our topic this morning, and also one's engagements in the community. So there are some obstacles to career self-management. One has to really continue to have growth needs strength and intrinsic value of development. If you don't have a positive attitude about that, it basically doesn't happen. Change is not always easy. Many people have internalized stereotypes in the workplace, and there are organizational factors. So I think what happens is that many wonderful challenges to maintaining ourselves in the workplace don't think of it as don't generalize it, because the dimensionality of it is very complex. And so what you really have is multiple vectors, and what we talk about in industrial psychology at a satisficing decision where all these dimensions come together. And as long as one has a healthy respect for individual differences in negotiating the life course in the world of work, then I think one has a pretty good feeling for what's happening today. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm told that I have 18 minutes, so I may go a little bit rapidly. Happy to see you all this morning, and I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. I am happy to have the opportunity to talk about issues with regards to health and retirement. What I'll do in my 18 minutes is talk about the demographics that every gerontologist de rigueur has to talk about. A study from the National Institute on Aging, which I've been a member of now for about 4 months, called the Health and Retirement Study, that talks a little bit about what, on a national probability sample basis, people have experienced or expect with regards to retirement. Some data about health and longevity, and then other factors related to morbidity and mortality, and then about the healthcare workforce that one can anticipate for individuals as they retire. Lots of things. So the de rigueur slides talking about numbers of individuals 65 and older through the 20th century, projected through the halfway through the 21st century. And of course, we all know that those individuals 85 and over are increasing exponentially. It's a segment of the population that often has health problems and needs attention to their health care. We also are very aware of the fact that the older segment of the population is becoming progressively more diverse, with more of what has stereotypically been considered a minority population increasing in proportion. The red represents those proportions for 2050. What we don't necessarily talk a lot about, at least in the medical school arena where I was up until October 12th, is that there's aging worldwide, with the segment of the population 65 and older increasing significantly, and that segment of the population less than 5 decreasing significantly, leading to potentially real challenges for those of us who are boomers when we turn 85 and older and may have need for support. Some of the data that's come from the National Institute on Aging says that we may not have to retire at 85 because the rates of disability are progressively declining. This is from the National Long-Term Care Survey led by Ken Manton and colleagues at Duke University. What had previously been projected was marked increases in disability. The rates of disability based upon their data are not as bad as we had originally thought, so that's good news for us. Yet on the other hand, other work that has been supported by our agency says that for that younger segment, the Generation X, Y, and younger, there are progressively increasing rates of disability that are of concern. Will there be populations of younger individuals who can help care for people 85 and older who often have frailty, whether it's physical or cognitive frailty, and need assistance? So that leads to looking at data from the Health and Retirement Study, a wonderful multi-site sample of people within the United States to determine what the retirement habits currently are and expectations are. And the good news from the health and retirement segment is that there are lots of folks who are out there, but even when you're 80, 83, 85, there are some people who are still working. Most of them working part-time, but small numbers working full-time. Much greater percentage of people working full-time, certainly 62 through to 70 or so, for both men and for women. So that's part of the data that's come from that. What they found in looking at those individuals who are 70 and older is that a significant percentage of those people who are still working are professional managers or in the clerical and sales field. Smaller numbers in the red are in crafts and operatives, and much smaller numbers are doing labor in the green. And that's something that would be intuitively evident. And what they looked at was what were the motivations to stop working. And what they found is that motivations to stop working, top motivation, more time with family, wanted to do other things, least likely didn't like the work. I guess people transitioned out of the work, they didn't like it. The thing I find really interesting is this red bar here that shows that in those individuals 55 to 69, the motivation to stop working because of poor health was a pretty high percentage of the individuals who retired at that age, and that went progressively down with increasing age. There was much more lifestyle factors than health that led people to retire as you got looked at the progressively older segment of the population. And in fact, in 1992, 1998, and 2004, they surveyed people to try to determine what their expectations were for full-time work after age 65, and whether they had less than a high school degree, a high school degree, some college, or college. The red bar is 2004. There's progressively increasing expectation that people are going to work full-time after age 65. Now, of course, they did not do that survey last month. I think that red bar would be still higher at this point. But it's interesting, and I think it goes along with the fact that the health of the population that's 65 and older has increased significantly from past years, and people expect to be able to continue working. So what are the data about one's health and one's longevity as related to work? This is another study that's been supported by the National Institute on Aging. It's the Whitehall study led by Sir Michael Marmot. And what they did was to look at people in the British government and what their health was. It's very similar to the health and retirement study, but done in the United Kingdom. And they looked at mortality, first of all, good, clear endpoint. And what they found is that those people who were at the high-level administrative roles had the lowest mortality, and those people who were in clerical roles had the highest mortality, which was quite interesting. They looked at coronary heart disease and tried to refine this a little bit further. It's related to high control of your circumstances, intermediate control, or low control of your job circumstances, and self-report or with some external measures that they define. And it was interesting that coronary heart disease was highest in those individuals who had the lowest control. I see Dr. Stearns shaking his head. Again, it would seem intuitively evident, but it's very nicely and objectively documented here. They looked at metabolic syndrome, the syndrome where one tends to have truncal obesity, poor blood sugar control, problems with blood pressure. And again, they found that those people who were at the highest echelons employment-wise tended, whether they're males or females, tended to have fewer problems with the metabolic syndrome than those people who were at the lowest echelons employment-wise. And as you know, in the United Kingdom, they have universal health coverage, so it's not an issue of access to health care. It's seemingly related to job status. Even more interesting in an agency like the National Institute on Aging, where we look at everything from the basic research to population research, and our basic researchers have been able to demonstrate that some of this is probably related to neuroendocrine changes. They looked at serum cortisol levels for people during the workday versus during the weekend, and those people who were the higher socioeconomic levels had lower cortisol levels during the workday and the weekend than those people who are at the lower levels. Again, giving further support to the idea that the work setting has an impact upon one's health, and probably supporting the idea that people who are in high-stress jobs are going to be more likely to retire. What are some of the other factors that are related to health and morbidity and mortality, likelihood of continued working? Obesity. Some of the increased disability that's being seen in the Generation Xers, Yers, and younger seems to be related to the increased prevalence of obesity in our country, and it's a problem for those individuals who are 65 years of age and older as well. This is from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And there's been a lot of excitement in our agency about the recent report by Christakis and colleagues in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2007 looking at the spread of obesity, that it seems to be related to one's social networks. If you had a lot of friends who were obese, you were more likely to be obese yourself. And I think it's gotten a lot of lay press coverage as well. This is a different representation of those data, and it shows that you're in every area, you're more likely to have problems with obesity if your friends are obese, with the exception of that friend being an opposite sex friend or just simply being a next door neighbor. But all the other interactions seem to have a role there. So I guess if you're working in a job setting that's stressful and a lot of obese people, that's a really bad combination. Our agency has also, however, produced some research reported here by Abbott and colleagues in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2004 that suggests that there are things that can be done to help with risks. Dementia is one of those things that will often lead to a person not being able to continue working. And what they were able to demonstrate is that walking seemed to be associated with the incidence of dementia, that the more one walked per day, this is representative of more than 2 miles per day, this is representative of less than a quarter mile per day, there seemed to be less frequency of dementia. Now, we're actively looking at what are the factors that lead to that, what are the neurohumoral factors, et cetera, but that's kind of encouraging. And of course, we've done a lot of work looking at other things that determine morbidity and mortality. Near Barzilai and colleagues have been conducting a study of centenarians. This is one of the families that they've been looking at. All siblings, 100, 102, 98, 95. This is them when they were younger. And there's no question that picking the right parents also makes a big difference in morbidity and mortality. Further representation of another centenarian study. So the likelihood of one working well beyond the age of 65 seems to be related to one's health status, seems to be related to the stress that one is facing, can potentially be modified by things like walking, and exercising, and of course choosing the right parents. But ultimately, many people do end up with health problems. So I was asked to talk about what's the future health of the lay population with retirement. I was also asked to talk about the health care workforce. And having been a practicing geriatrician, someone asked me, did I ever get it right? Well, yeah, I practiced for more than 20 years, and I don't know. But I can certainly say that from the workforce perspective, we have concerns. In fact, the Institute of Medicine came out with a report in April of 2008 called Retooling for an Aging America, the Future Healthcare Workforce. And some of the data from that report I'm sharing with you here. One big concern expressed in the report, I was privileged to be part of that panel, was that the direct care workforce that can help take care of those people who are well beyond the age of 85 and who may have developed significant physical or cognitive frailty is not there now, and we're not projecting that it's going to be there. And we need to make some changes to take care of that. Part of the reason for that is data such as this. It shows that food counter attendants, hourly salary, in other words, McDonald's workers, personal and home care aides, just a little bit more, home health aides, just a little bit more at the top of the chain, or nurse aides. But these people who are providing health care oftentimes are on food stamps, oftentimes do not have health insurance. And what was said around the table is that if McDonald's started providing health insurance, the personal care field would be decimated. So there's concern along those lines. And then with the other health professionals who are involved in the care of frail elders, nurses, physicians, pharmacists, dentists, we currently do not have a sufficient number of those individuals, and we're going to need more, and we're not yet prepared to meet that challenge. Part of the reason there, again, is unfortunately money. This is very specifically addressing physicians, and it's not just because I'm a physician that I'm presenting these data. It was more difficult to get definitive data for the other disciplines, but it's representative. This shows the median compensation for a physician who's been trained in geriatric medicine and certified in the field. And particularly in these days and times, I recognize that $163,000 sounds like a lot of money. But as you look down the line and look at the compensation for individuals who are trained in endocrinology, hematology, rheumatology, and see that they are getting more in the way of median compensation, and when you recognize that medical students these days, as they graduate from medical school, are graduating with $80,000 to $120,000 on average of indebtedness, it's easy to understand why geriatric medicine fellowship programs fill at a 54% rate as opposed to these other training programs. And thus, in the future, unless things change, having those physicians and other healthcare professionals with special expertise to take care of very frail elders may not be there. So, in summary, I would say that for the future, it looks like at least the current cohort of older individuals may work longer because they want to, they like to, particularly if they're not in a high-stress position. It's hard to say what's going to happen with Generation Xers and Yers because of increased problems with disability and obesity. As I said, there are things that we possibly can do to modify that, but we certainly need to be concerned about the healthcare field and who those healthcare workers will be in the future. And I'll close with the de rigueur closing slide from NIH and NIA, talking about the resources that are available should you be interested in pursuing some of the things that we currently have. Very specifically, I brought a copy of a document called Aging Under the Microscope, A Biological Quest. How many of you are familiar with this? That's very nice to see. As a new member of the NIA team, I said, this is wonderful. It talks a lot about the basic biology of aging, and even though we had a required geriatric medicine rotation for our medical students at University of Oklahoma, we didn't use this. So I have some copies for those of you who are not familiar with it. If you're interested, and you can go to any one of our websites to get any of this additional information that you'd like. Thank you.
Copy of my presentation. I actually loaded onto Harvey's computer. So two of them have the same title. Any? Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. I do. Great. Well, I want to also welcome all of you. It's nice to see so many of you here. I am really excited about this symposium, how it's shaping up. I'm intrigued by the multidisciplinary and perhaps even interdisciplinary nature of the conversations and the presentations. I am going to take a different perspective on the topic that Harvey gave to us for the symposium, understanding the changing nature of work across the life course. Harvey focused very much on individual factors and career self-management. Marie talked about the intersection between health and work. I would like to talk about the possibility that one of gerontology's best contributions to understanding the changing nature of work across the life course really comes from using the life course perspective, and in particular, considering the idea of a differential life course. The differential life course, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. There are a number of fine scholars, a whole lot of fine scholars who are writing in this area. These are just a few of the names of people who are helping us to think about the fact that the life course does not play out the same for everybody else. I'm sure that this perspective is familiar to everyone in this room, but the idea is that people move through their lives following different turns and taking different paths depending on a wide range of factors, including structural factors within which we have to operate, but also personal choice. And I think Harvey really talked a lot about the sort of individual choice, individual patterning of our own life course with the idea of career self-management. Some of these other authors are encouraging us to look at other things that are at play within the life course. I'm sure everyone knows Rick Sederson's fine work on the life course. Dale Danifer offers a challenging question that I will refer to throughout this presentation, and that question is, whose life course is it anyway? Phil talks about the gendered nature of the life course. Angie Oran talks about the stratified life course. Christine Fry, who's an anthropologist, offers an interesting perspective on how cultural concepts of time have a very, very important impact on the concept of the life course and, again, the way the life course plays out. So I think the idea of the differential life course is very applicable to a lot of the work that we do, but it is certainly applicable to this question that Harvey posed to us in the symposium, which is to understand the changing nature of work and also what gerontology can bring to understanding the changing nature of work. So as I develop my position that the differential life course is a really important perspective to bring to these questions, I want to specifically talk about some comparisons between what's happening in the developing nations as opposed to the more developed nations in terms of work and life course, and also to take a kind of a historical perspective on what the life course used to look like and what it looks like now. And ultimately, coming back to this question, whose life course are we talking about, and whose work are we talking about? So my assumptions and starting points, things that we all know, any good student of gerontology certainly knows these issues about the life course. But to just set a common ground, set the stage here for where I'm coming from, my argument is that the life course does change over time. The life course, the stages we will occupy, the phases we will go through, the transitions we will go through, all of those structures of the life course will change, do change over time, and they vary by culture, what part of the world we live in, but also by the social, structural situation we occupy within our own culture. Gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. All of these influence what kind of life course you possibly can have. They influence how much you can manage your own career. And these changes in the life course, the sort of aggregated changes in the life course are affected by demographic change, by economic situations, and again, Harvey referred to how different his presentation is based on circumstances that were imposed upon people by the economic change, social change, and ideological change, the expectations we develop about what we should be doing at certain stages in our life. Now, with any conversation about the life course, I think we have to have a caveat about the possible dangers, and I say this because I often commit one of these errors, but there are people critique life course discussions because you can make a lot of mistakes. If you pay too much attention to the social structural factors, demography, economics, you can sound like you are arguing that the life course is determined for people, that we don't have a lot of choice, we don't have a lot of options, we don't create our own life course. That's the mistake that I'm most likely to make, and I guarantee you I will make in this presentation. Others argue that if you focus too much on human agency and how individuals make their choices and set their own course, that's overly reductionistic, that it's too focused on the individual and it doesn't acknowledge the structural forces, social forces, economic forces that shape us. And ultimately, we can end up with an overly individualized view of the life course. That if you say, well, it's all about individual choices within social constraints and everybody finds their own way, then we lose the value of the concept of a life course. If it's different for everybody all the time, then we lose the value of the concept. So the life course perspective is challenging, but I think it's crucial and it's good if we can avoid making these mistakes, and you can challenge me on the mistake that you will see me make. Well, the life course does change over time, and we have new phases of the life course that emerge, which I think is really fascinating, and it's a great way to understand the macro level forces that are at work. Philip Aries did some very interesting work on the emergence of adolescence as a life phase. We didn't used to have a phase called adolescence. There was no such thing as adolescence. You went from being a child to being an adult. But when life expectancy increased, longevity increased, several things happened. The population grew, so we had more people available to work. Because we lived longer, we had more time that we could spend working, and so we ended up with and the economy changed at the same time. The nature of work changed at the same time. So we ended up with more people available to do the work, and the work required fewer people than an agricultural economy did. So we ended up with a new life phase to deal with the fact that we didn't need people to enter work right as they left childhood. So we ended up with a new life phase called adolescence that was a post-childhood, pre-employment period, which gave rise to a very new and extensive social institution called education, secondary education. One of my colleagues, actually graduate student who just defended her dissertation, Dawn Carr, has done some work on the third age, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, the idea that we now have another emerging new life phase, which is a phase of life after you retire, but while you're still healthy and active, and before severe disability sets in. So now we have yet another life phase that we're beginning to talk about, and beginning to talk about what should people do in that life phase called the third age. You're not working for pay anymore, but you're healthy and you want to stay active and you can contribute. We're recognizing the opportunities that we should make available to older people, and we don't want to lose that wisdom and that experience. So the third age is raising all kinds of new questions about the life course and about work. One of my favorite examples of life course and how life course plays out differently in different cultures comes from the work of Jack Levin, I believe, I can't remember. The idea that romantic love and courtship is a phenomenon that is not universal. There are societies where there's just no time for illusions of romantic love. Societies where arranged marriages are still very common. And it's a pretty efficient way of dealing with the business of getting married and producing children when life expectancy isn't very long. So the societies that still have arranged marriages, it's very much a cultural value, but I would argue, and based on Levin's work, I would argue that it is because of a shorter life expectancy that romantic love and extended courtship is not a part of the marriage and family life course in those countries. You don't have time to try out different partners and to see if this is the love of your life. That's just not the way it's done. So here I would argue that it's something as unromantic as demography. Life expectancy can actually shape our ideas about what should happen in our love lives. So these changes in these demographic and economic realities do reflect themselves in life course patterns and phases and in what people expect to do across their lives and when they expect to do them. So based on these macro level changes, individuals experience change, and we see that reflected in some pretty powerful data, and Marie had some of these same kinds of slides in her presentation. This slide simply indicates, but powerfully indicates, how different our expectations or our experiences of labor force participation have changed. This shows the proportion of older people, people 65 plus, who participate in the labor force and how that has changed between 1948 and 2007. Dramatic decrease overall for men, but now in the past few decades it's creeping back up. And again, it may be economic realities, it may be better health, it may be the changing nature of work, and a similar pattern for men than, the shape of the curve is similar for men and for women. But there's always a difference between labor force participation for men and for women. Another slide that shows some of the same things, though I added this one because it also shows some different patterns for people of different ages. The previous one was just people 65 plus. This breaks down the older population into smaller age groups. And so what we see pick any year on the x-axis, and you see that the likelihood of being in the labor force goes down with age as age goes up. But we also see some different patterns over time for different age groups. So the 55 to 61-year-old group, and this is women, we're seeing an increase in women's labor force participation for those women who are 55 to 61. For the oldest age group, 70 and over, it's remained pretty flat. But for the other age groups, we're seeing a slight increase for women over time. A similar pattern for men, except that men 55 to 61, that proportion is going down over time. For women, it's going up. For men, it's going down. So when we talk about work across the life course and the changing nature of work, I suggest that it's wonderful to look at historical changes, but we have to start pulling apart those patterns, because the pattern is different for men than for women, and it's different for people of different age groups. So we can, I think, agree that there has been a change in the life course with respect to work, change in life course patterns as indicated by demographic trends. But maybe some of the more interesting questions are, what does this mean in people's lives, and how do we think about what the changing nature of work might mean? Well, I think we need to begin with the idea that work is the center of the concept of the life course. This idea has been put forth and criticized by, again, numerous scholars, including Martin Coley and John Henrietta, who point out that the life course is entirely arranged around work. You have a phase of education where you're getting ready to work, you work, and then you leave work when you retire. And this has been called the tripartitioned life course, and as I said, has been criticized for a fairly narrow view. In fact, whose life course are we talking about? It's very, very easy to see that women define their life courses quite differently. For women, it's not just about work, it's about family. And it's not just about family, it's about the intersection of stages of life that are involved with decisions about and opportunities for work and family life. So this pre-work, work, post-work conception of the life course it's valuable, but it's quite limited. It only applies to a certain kind of person, in a certain kind of economy, in a certain kind of socioeconomic situation. So I think we can take a step back even further to even look at, what do we mean by work? Not possible. Okay. I said there's no way I have 15 minutes worth. How do we even define work? Well, often work is defined by contrasting it with non-work, which usually we're making a distinction between paid labor and unpaid labor. But in other parts of the world, we have to also pay attention to different kinds of work in what's called the unorganized work sector, which is a phrase that wasn't particularly familiar to me till I started reading chapters from countries around the world about older people's work experience. They're involved in the unorganized labor market sector. So we do see changes and variations in the life course across time and by culture. Here's one, I think, very interesting example of the changing nature of work, the changing meaning of work within the US. This shows the median years of service that workers have with their current employer. And if we can just look at the two oldest age groups for men and for women. For men, the 50 to 54, the median number of years with current employer dropped from 14 years in 1983 to now less than 10 years in the year 2000. So in a fairly short period of time, the median number of years that any one person spends with their employer has dropped considerably. For men, it's dropped far more than it has for women, but women have a shorter time with their employer anyway. There's also interesting new data about workers who are currently between the ages of 18 and 34. The average number of jobs that a US worker will have between the ages of 18 and 34 is, anybody want to guess? How many jobs do you think the average 18 to 34-year-old will have in those years of life? Somewhere in between there, 9. 9 jobs between the ages of 18 and 34. So the meaning of work has changed, our experiences with work has changed This gives rise to all kinds of interesting generational issues in the workplace, which I think a lot of you are aware of. The older generations where loyalty to your employer is a very strong driving value. Clearly, that's not the way of work these days. All right. And then we have pretty dramatic differences in global patterns of employment and work. And the most important variable here is gender. There are astoundingly low rates of labor force participation for women in certain parts of the world. In Middle Eastern and North African nations, where we have the lowest rate of labor force participation of women, it's about 20%. So these are women whose lives center around family and home. Again, if we could buy the model that we have structure, but within that structure we have choice, and women are choosing this, we could say, yeah, that's good. So variable life courses, everybody's choosing their path. That is not what's happening for women in these countries. It's related to lack of access to education. It's related to lack of control over their own fertility decisions. And that then is related to labor force participation. There's a complex set of relationships among fertility, education, and labor force participation that's really quite compelling. And data from Morocco suggests that education has, and data from around the world suggests this, education has a powerful influence on fertility for women. In Morocco, women who have secondary education and higher, 66% of them use contraceptives, compared to 44% of women with no education. Only 44% of women with no education use contraceptives, and the average number of children they have is 4. For women who are educated, who do use contraception, the average number of babies is 1.9. So a fertility rate that's twice as high based on education. Education is related to fertility. Education is related to labor force participation, but ironically, some very important data from the United Nations suggests that until women feel economically empowered, they don't feel empowered to make decisions about childbearing. So it's a very difficult circle to break into. They need access to education, and they need access to labor force participation so that they can make their own fertility decisions, but they can't make their own fertility decisions if they've got 6 kids at home. So it's a challenging situation, and I think it really calls into question the ideas about agency within structure. So here's where I'm taking my stand about the power of social structure and cultural context. These women they have no agency. They are not free to make their own decisions because they have no power. So finally, we are seeing changes in the life course. We have seen changes in the life course. I've mentioned a few of the examples with the third age, with Don Carr's work, and the emergence of adolescence, et cetera. And there are exciting new challenges in understanding the life course and the place of work. Rick Settersten's scholarship on adulthood, what it means to be an adult in this day and age. And it used to be you went to school, you left school, you got a job, and you were a grown-up. But now that is not what happens for lots of reasons. Moving into and out of the labor force, now it seems to be related to whether you get health insurance or not. You get your first job with health insurance, and then you're an adult. But so we're interesting, exciting literature on scholarship and thinking about the life course. And we now do have these new phases, these new stages, these new expectations, the third age, and all the literature about fulfilling the promise, civic engagement, productive aging, which is wonderful. But my question is whether we're simply reinforcing that tripartitioned life course concept, that this work of productive aging and volunteering and civic engagement, it's now unpaid work, but it's still work. And maybe it's fine, but I think we're still pretty focused on a narrow view of a tripartition life course that is accessible only to some people. So I leave you with the question, yeah, we've got an old life course, we've got a new life course, but it really does come back to the question of whose life course is it anyway? Thank you.
now for something completely different. All right. When Harvey proposed doing this at the last past president's meeting, I talked with him shortly thereafter about doing something a little bit different about work and really talking about an autobiographical perspective on work, and also looking at the life course of AGHE. And so this is going to be a little bit different, and it's different also in the fact that wonderful facts and data provided previously, and this is a bit more conceptual. So let me say first that I've entitled this paper, I'm given a paper. You remember what that is, a paper. I've entitled this, When the Field of Old Doesn't Get Old. My comments about work across the life course are fundamentally autobiographical, but I hope that they relate to your reality. They are also fairly conceptual or abstract, but I hope that they contain some practical implications. One of the difficulties of reading a paper is when you're here with the light down for PowerPoint, you can't read what you got in front of you. Yeah. Can we get a little more light, maybe? Let's cast some light on the subject. Thank you. So they're fairly conceptual or abstract, but I hope that they contain some practical implications. At the same time, I wish to comment not only on my own history of work across the life course, but also of gerontology's history across its life course. That's good, thank you. Less grandly, these are my perspectives from my very limited vantage point, and I mean that in all sincerity with no qualifications or false humility. I think Churchill was talking about me when he said that person's humility is well deserved. Also, this is Lent, and my wife is encouraging me to give up having to be right all the time. So this is my very limited phenomenology. I see in the almost constantly changing priorities of gerontology and in the periodic ascendance, dominance, and decline of favored topics and perspectives in the field an energy that renews and inspires far more than it exsanguinates and depresses. For we have been trying to recognize and describe the remarkably diverse and wildly complex phenomenon of growing older. More recently, we have been attempting to understand and appreciate the experiences of being older. So we have employed the social behavioral, biomedical, psychological, and public policy armamentaria, among others, in the first instance, supplemented by the humanities and the arts in the second. Still, to a fair degree, much of gerontology is focused on improving and refining the precision with which we measure, as in measuring response latency to a stimulus, measuring differences between groups in a particular acquired characteristic such as education or material wealth, measuring the health correlates of attendance at religious functions or acts of religious tradition, measuring the efficiency of organ functions, etc. I've come to ask myself, is there a disconnect between what gerontology focuses on and what it means to grow older? Is there a disconnect between what we focus on in the classroom and how we educational gerontologists live our lives as we age? Recently, I was in a church and heard a powerfully simple homily where the speaker asked those in the church if there was a difference in the life of the listener between what happens in here and what happens out there. Okay. As noted, gerontology has danced around like water on a skillet with various hot topics, pun intended. That's, you know, thank you. Think about the waves of dominant topics in scientific and educational gerontology meetings over the years. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. There we go. My first Gerontological Society meeting, GS before it was GSA, was Houston in 1971. The dominant topics included Havighurst's developmental tasks and the theory of disengagement. I, a freshly minted PhD in learning psychology, who was trying to initiate a curriculum on aging at the University of Maryland in College Park, went to the meeting having just read the then best-selling Middle Age and Aging by Bernice Newgarten, which discussed, among other things, various ways of defining age, chronological, social, physical, etc., and introduced the concept of socially sanctioned on-time behavior. I went to the hotel lobby in the Shamrock Hilton to call Bernice Newgarten's room to see if she might later have a couple of minutes to give me some advice. Naivete more than brashness motivated this move. Bernice answered the phone and, not knowing me from Adam, invited me to her suite where she ordered us tea from room service, and we talked for more than an hour. At that time, my gerontological focus was on learning and memory with age. At the next year's Gerontological Society meeting in San Juan, I presented a paper on paired associate learning and the concept of meaningfulness in material to be learned. Papers at that time were papers that were typed, typically running about 20 pages, and were intended to be distributed in the session. In San Juan, I met and had substantial conversations with Paul and Margaret Baltus, among others, but most importantly, I met Harvey Stearns, and my life has never been the same. My first AGHE annual meeting was in 1976 at the 4-H Center in Washington, D.C. This keeps one humble, doesn't it? I'll tell you. This was AGHE's second annual meeting. Here, for me, AOA funding of gerontology centers dominated my attention. We had obtained AOA support for our program in Maryland in 1974, and I met fellow directors and, importantly, the AOA staff and their gerontology friends, including Sean Sweeney, Byron Gold, Bill Beachell, Tom Hickey, and Clark Tibbetts. My intent is not so much to a walk down memory lane as an observation that the stuff of professional meetings tends to be very time-limited, almost ephemeral in retrospect. We often remember better the people we met than the meeting's contributions to our own understanding of aging and the older person. From a half-empty perspective, this speaks to the scarcity of theories to drive research and teaching, the past vagaries of funded support, the transitory impacts of influential leaders in the field, and more. From the half-full perspective, the changes in focus reflect the kid in a candy store freneticism of a field that is still objectively quite young, that is maturing and realizing, like the adage about adolescence, that it doesn't already know everything. In my professional life, I've immersed myself in gerontology career preparation, those Title IV grants, the depiction of aging in children's literature, and later in country music, summer institutes for practitioners, elder abuse, rural aging, geropharmacy, pre-retirement education and planning, the humanities and the arts, aging with lifelong developmental disabilities, cross-system coalition building, and geriatric training and education. That was the time for that. At times, I have worked energetically in 3 or more of them. There. I'm just talking too fast, I'm sorry. At times, I've worked in 3 or more of these topics simultaneously. Notably, at the times that I initiated my commitment to these interests, they were decidedly not mainstream topics in either educational gerontology or a broader gerontology. It was common to have few or no attendees at my conference sessions. I remember one time we were in New Orleans, and GSA had given Peter Lamy and I the ballroom, the 15 or 1,800 person ballroom for our presentation. And we in the audience sat around in 5 seats, which was kind of interesting. Many years ago, I began referring to my focuses as marginal gerontology, making me a marginal gerontologist, for I found that as the script of aging is being written, some of the most interesting observations are scribbled in the page's margins. Marginal gerontology, for me, has added dimensionality to what can be and often has been the dominance of the unidimensional in our field. And yes, it is possible to have multidisciplinary unidimensionality, as when two or more disciplines devote themselves to relatively superficial descriptive statistics. It's like squaring the number 1. For even 1 to the 10th power is still 1. While I cannot truthfully claim to exercise the same level of energy and commitment to my current projects as to those earlier in my work career, I do find that the life course of the field of gerontology is renewing and inspirational. Or maybe it's just that I admire Sisyphus, who must have been not only a Cubs fan, but a gerontologist. Gerontology being the systematic study of Gerontology being the systematic study of the processes of aging is necessarily multidisciplinary, including many disciplines that attempt to understand the complexity of aging, to prepare for, or to predict the consequences of an aging population. It is also necessarily complicated and decidedly messy. The tag, aging ain't for sissies, also applies to those of us who work in the field. Returning to the complexities, we see, for example, that having more older adults in the population has implications for family life, for businesses, for the educational system, for recreational outlets, for health care, just to name a few. Therefore, gerontology should be relevant for psychologists, sociologists, lawyers, educators, recreation specialists, physical therapists, social workers, nurses, and physicians. Having a larger number of older adults with greater longevity means that families can expect to have 4 or 5 generations alive simultaneously. This has implications for the housing and telecommunications and transportation industries, among others. Having more old adults who live longer means that businesses and governments must plan for pensions and retirement benefits that cost more and last longer. Consequently, gerontology should be relevant for economists, bankers, financial planners, insurance providers, and public policy makers. At the same time, the older or the retired person might consider how best to use his or her longer lifespan. Lifelong learning, volunteering, recreation, family life, community engagement, being the hero in service to others, or might ponder the very meaning of a longer life through meditation, yoga, reading, music, spiritual activities, the reclusive activity in search of the light. Therefore, gerontology should be relevant for educational and social groups, for organized religion, for the humanities and the arts, for spiritual groups, and various community agencies. The fact that these shoulds have not already been realized is both discouraging and encouraging. Our work itself, we realize, is lifelong. Returning to the title of the session, namely, the role and meaning of work over the life course, consider the subject at hand to be not only the role and meaning of work over one's own life course, but also the role and meaning of gerontology's work over gerontology's life course. We ask again the profoundly simple question, is what's happening in here relevant to what's happening out there? What if gerontology could be the doorway through which we come to understand not only human aging, but human life? What would we add or subtract to the prevailing curriculum? How would we shift our stance or point of reference in facing our subject matter? What and how would we teach? My collaboration with colleagues in Japan, India, and across Southeast Asia my collaborations have caused me and others to ask ourselves these questions. As we prepare to help our colleagues to establish or to further their own gerontology programs, we assessed what currently constitutes the usual gerontological curriculum. We recognized its limitations. Some subjects and issues were less relevant in certain cultural contexts. Much of the focus is external and one-dimensional. We also came to realize that our colleagues across these countries have much to teach us in our quest to appreciate, better understand, and teach about human aging. We have come to see that here is an opportunity to reimagine or reconceptualize what would constitute gerontology and how it is taught. Gerontologists typically see aging as a time that offers both opportunities and needs. Older adults have acquired lifetimes of experiences that are rich in variety. They have learned skills, traveled places, met people, and shaped lives that are unique to themselves. One of the basic principles of gerontology should be that, in important ways, people grow less alike, more varied as they age. Surprisingly, growing older often means that people have less in common with their age mates. I made an observation that I think the real story of gerontology is in the within-group variance, within the standard areas of measurement, when we consider the work that we're doing nomothetically. Surprisingly, growing older often means that people have less in common with their age mates. True, many have gray hair or arthritis or have lived through common historical events, but their perspectives in their lives have been unique. This poses distinct challenges to geriatricians, for instance. A geriatrician may see 5 patients in a day who have similar symptoms, and let's say he or she makes a similar diagnosis for all of them. The prognoses or next steps for these 5 may be vastly different because age increases the dissimilarity among them. They will vary in their education, familiarity with the healthcare system, likelihood of adhering to prescribed medications, daily diet, network of support, belief or value system, personal economics, and more. All of these differences can affect the outcome of the physician's intended treatment plan. Again, in general, aging increases the differences among people. This presents challenges to many of us, including planners and business marketers, for there is no simple or common message to reach them. Human service providers, for there is no one-size-fits-all template. And to those of us who try to communicate either with those outside or with our students inside, for there is no simple message with regard to the depth and multidimensionality of the processes of aging and the experiences of growing older. In a larger sense, in a view from above, so to speak, our work as gerontologists should attempt not only to describe body functions and the various external persona wrapping aging individuals, but also to appreciate the self within. Some of us, if not the majority, know as we grow older that deep inside we see more than the acquisitions, appearances, and attendant characteristics, however exquisitely measured by others. That we are more than these, that we are more than the acquisitions, appearances, and attendant characteristics, however exquisitely measured by others. There is a self that we search to find as we age. In other words, gerontology should include a way to help those of us who are not old to understand the importance for many who are old to discern meaning in their longer lives, perhaps to search for the infinite, the true self, the oneness, the spirit, or the divine at the core of life. And gerontology should help those of us who are old to discern and to discover. The compelling complexity of growing older, individually and as groups, is what can and should energize us as gerontologists. Whether through mainstream or marginal gerontology, the search to understand usually is not completed in one's lifetime, nor will it be in gerontology's lifetime. It's ever evolving. This is why the field of old doesn't get old. Thank you. I'll tell you one other thing about the field of old, and that is that when your eyes go and you can't read what's in front of you, and it's in 14 point, that's troublesome. In any event, we do have some time for questions or observations, contributions.
La cucaracha ya no puede caminar porque no tiene, porque le falta marihuana que fumar. La cucaracha, la cucaracha.